From the mist-laden hills of ancient Celtic lands to the deep, shadowed groves of sacred forests, the figure of a Druid has long been one of mystery and wonder. Their name is echoed through the ages, carried by the wind in stories and myths. Yet little is known about who they truly were. The ancient Druids remain one of the most enigmatic groups in history, their existence blending the real and the mythological, leaving behind an imprint of awe and intrigue that has lasted millennia. Their role in society, their beliefs, their rituals, and their place in Celtic life are all shrouded in ambiguity, and this uncertainty is what has both fascinated and baffled historians and enthusiasts alike. The term Druid itself is derived from the ancient Celtic language, but its precise meaning remains elusive. Some believe it originates from the word Druid, which translates to oak-wise, pointing to the deep connection the Druids had with nature, especially sacred trees like the mighty oak. Others suggest it might come from the word Druid, which roughly means a learned one or a sage. Either way, the image of the Druid conjures up notions of wisdom, mystery, and a close, almost spiritual relationship with the natural world. They were seen as the keepers of knowledge, the wise men and women of their time, entrusted with understanding the forces that govern both nature and human life. They were believed to be able to commune with gods, predict the future, and even shape the fate of kings and warriors through their words and rituals. Yet, for all their influence and importance, very little is known for certain about the Druids. The ancient Celts, who were spread across what is now modern-day France, the British Isles, and parts of Germany and Eastern Europe, did not leave behind written records of their lives. This absence of first-hand documentation has left us with only the accounts of Roman historians, travelers, and later Christian scholars who, understandably, often viewed the Druids through their own cultural lens. What we do know comes largely from these external sources, and often their perspectives were clouded by bias and misunderstanding. The Romans, for instance, saw the Druids not only as religious leaders, but as a formidable political and social force. They were more than just priests. They were judges, advisors, philosophers, and healers. For the Celts, the Druids were central figures, their wisdom revered and their decisions binding. But the Romans, in their quest for dominance over Celtic lands, made a point to suppress Druidic practices, seeing them as a threat to their imperial rule. Through these encounters, much of what we know about the Druids comes from the words of Roman officials like Julius Caesar and Tacitus, who often painted the Druids in a rather sinister light, focusing on their sacrificial rituals and their role in inciting rebellion against Roman occupation. Yet, while these external accounts are invaluable, they are also limited in color by the perspectives of those who recorded them. There is no account from the Druids themselves, no writings or teachings left by them to clarify who they were and what they truly believed. This absence has led to a great deal of speculation, myth-making, and romanticization throughout history, especially during the Renaissance and later periods, when scholars and mystics sought to revive the ancient ways of the Druids. Over time, the figure of the Druid became entwined with notions of magic, sorcery, and the occult, creating a mythology around them that is often more fiction than fact. But beyond the myths and the grand stories that have surrounded them, what did the Druids actually do? Who were they in the context of ancient Celtic society? Their role was vast, spanning various aspects of daily life, and they were respected as a spiritual, intellectual, and judicial elite. It is believed that the Druids were involved in every aspect of Celtic life, from leading religious ceremonies to resolving disputes, and even advising kings and chieftains on matters of governance. They were seen as the voices of the gods, intermediaries between the human world and the divine. Their influence extended beyond religion. They were also the keepers of knowledge, preserving oral traditions, ancient lore, and the wisdom of the ancients. The religious practices of the Druids are another area of intrigue and mystery. They were deeply connected to the cycles of nature, the changing seasons, and the rhythms of the earth. The Druids believed that the world was imbued with spiritual forces, and they sought to harness these forces through rituals and ceremonies conducted at sacred sites, often in remote groves or beside ancient stones. Their religious beliefs were animistic, believing that all aspects of nature, the trees, rivers, animals, and the land itself, were alive and inhabited by spirits. This reverence for nature was at the heart of Druidic spirituality, which celebrated the interconnectedness of all things. In this way, the Druids saw themselves not as separate from a natural world, but as a part of a vast, interconnected web of life. However, Much of what we know about their beliefs comes from later sources, many of whom were eager to frame Druidic practices within their own worldview. For example, the Romans and later the Christian Church were quick to demonize the Druids, focusing on their supposed ritual sacrifices and painting them as barbaric figures. In truth, very little is known about the specifics of Druidic rituals, and while it is certain that the Druids performed ceremonies, the details of these practices remain largely unknown. Were they as violent as some accounts suggest? Or were they, in reality, peaceful stewards of the earth, seeking to live in harmony with nature and the divine? One of the most powerful images of the Druids that has survived through the ages is that of the wise sage or prophet, able to peer into the future or commune with the gods. The Druids were often seen as seers, possessing the ability to predict the future through their knowledge of the natural world. They were thought to have a deep understanding of the cycles of the earth, the movement of the stars, and the forces that shape the fate of individuals and nations. In many ways, the Druids were considered the intellectual and spiritual leaders of their people, not just for their knowledge of the past, but for their ability to guide the future. And so, the Druids continue to live on in our collective imagination. Their figure has become larger than life, a symbol of ancient wisdom and mystical power. We often imagine them as mysterious figures, cloaked in ritualistic garments, standing before sacred stones, or conducting mysterious ceremonies beneath the full moon. But in truth, the reality of who they were is far less certain. As we will explore in this video, much of the Druidic legacy has been lost to time, leaving us with fragments of their culture, their beliefs, and their practices. Yet, it is through these fragments that the mystery of the Druids continues to captivate us, inviting us to look beyond the known and venture into the realm of legend and possibility. By the end of our exploration, we will not only gain a deeper understanding of who the Druids were, but also reflect on why their legacy continues to intrigue us. What was it about these ancient figures that made them so important to the Celts, and why do we still care about them today? The answer to these questions may never be fully known, but that is perhaps part of the charm. The Druids, with their deep connection to nature, their wisdom, and their role in shaping the ancient Celtic world, remain a beautiful mystery, one that we will continue to ponder long into the future. To truly understand the Druids and their place in history, we must first look at the world in which they lived. The ancient Celtic world was a vast and diverse landscape, stretching across much of Europe, from the wind-swept highlands of Scotland to the rolling hills of modern-day Turkey. At its heart was a culture that was deeply connected to the land, the seasons, and the cycles of nature. It was a world where the boundaries between the human and the natural realms were not as sharply defined as they are today. The Celts saw themselves as part of the natural world, woven into the fabric of the earth and sky, where every tree, river, mountain, and animal had spiritual significance. In this world, the Druids were central figures. They were not just religious leaders, but also philosophers, historians, lawmakers, and healers. Their knowledge of the natural world, the human body, and the spiritual realm was vast, and their influence reached across many aspects of Celtic society. But to understand their importance, we must first immerse ourselves in the environment that shaped their beliefs and practices. The Celts were a group of tribes united by a common language, culture, and spiritual worldview. They lived in small, tight-knit communities, with each tribe occupying a distinct territory. These communities were often located near rivers or forests, places that were believed to be imbued with sacred energy. The Celts saw nature as alive, filled with spirits that governed both the seen and unseen forces of the world. Everything had a spirit, from the largest oak tree to the smallest stream. The Celts did not view the natural world as something to be conquered or exploited. Instead, they believed in living in harmony with it. This belief system was foundational to their way of life, influencing everything from their rituals to their daily routines. In these Celtic communities, the Druids played an essential role as mediators between the human and the spiritual worlds. The Druids were the ones who interpreted the will of the gods, the forces of nature, and the spirits of ancestors. They acted as intermediaries, channeling divine wisdom through their rituals and ceremonies. These rituals, often performed in sacred groves or other natural sites, were designed to maintain balance between the human world and the spiritual realms. Whether it was through prayers, sacrifices, or symbolic acts, the Druids sought to ensure that the community remained in favor with the gods and nature. The importance of nature to the Celts cannot be overstated. Their entire worldview was shaped by a deep respect for the land and its cycles. They were keenly aware of the changing seasons, the phases of the moon, and the movements of the stars. These natural rhythms guided their agricultural practices, as well as their religious festivals. The Celts celebrated the equinoxes and solstices, marking the turning of the year with festivals dedicated to the sun, the earth, and the forces of life and death. For the Celts, the year was not a linear progression, but a cyclical journey, with each season representing a different phase in the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In this context, the Druids were more than just spiritual leaders. They were the keepers of knowledge about the natural world. They understood the patterns of the stars, the cycles of planting and harvesting, and the seasonal changes that govern life. The Druidic teachings were passed down orally, for the Druids believed that knowledge was a sacred gift that should not be written down. This method of transmission ensured that the wisdom of the Druids remained in the hands of a select few, those who were chosen to carry the knowledge forward. It also meant that much of what we know about the Druids today comes from external sources, as they did not leave behind written records of their practices and beliefs. One of the most important aspects of Druidic knowledge was their understanding of the spiritual energy that flowed through the world. They believed that everything in nature was interconnected, and that the spirits of the land, the sky, and the water were constantly influencing the lives of humans. The Druids saw themselves as the guardians of the spiritual wisdom, responsible for maintaining balance and harmony in the world. They were often called upon to perform rituals to heal the sick, ensure good harvests, and guide the community through difficult times. These rituals were deeply intertwined with the natural world, often taking place in groves of oak trees or by sacred wells. The trees, in particular, held great significance for the Druids, with the oak tree being especially revered for its strength and endurance. In the Celtic world, the land itself was sacred. It was not just a physical space, but a living entity full of spiritual power. The Celts believed that the land had a consciousness, and that it could be affected by human actions. This belief in the sacredness of the land gave rise to a culture that was deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature. It also meant that the Druids had a profound influence over the community, as they were the ones who interpreted the will of the land and the gods. They understood the spiritual significance of places, and many sacred sites were tied to natural features like hills, rivers, and forests. The Celts were also deeply connected to their ancestors. Ancestor worship was a central part of their religious practices, and the Druids played a key role in maintaining this connection. They believed that the spirits of the ancestors lived on the land, and that they could be called upon for guidance and protection. The Druids, as keepers of ancestral wisdom, were tasked with preserving the stories and traditions of the past. These oral traditions were passed down through generations, ensuring that the collective memory of the Celtic people remained intact. The Druidic order, therefore, was not just a religious institution, but a cultural one, preserving the very identity of the Celtic tribes. As we move through this exploration of the ancient Celtic world, it becomes clear that the Druids were not isolated figures, but integral to the fabric of Celtic society. Their deep understanding of nature, their reverence for the land, and their ability to connect with the spiritual realm made them vital to the survival and prosperity of their communities. They were the spiritual leaders, but also the intellectuals, lawmakers, and healers. They held a position of immense power and respect, and their influence shaped every aspect of Celtic life. The ancient Celtic world was one of deep spirituality, a place where the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms were fluid and interconnected. The Druids, as the keepers of the sacred knowledge, were central to the well-being of the people. They guided their communities through the rhythms of life, helping them navigate the cycles of the seasons, the uncertainties of war, and the challenges of daily life. Their wisdom, passed down through the ages, was a reflection of the deep connection the Celts felt with the land, the gods, and the spirits that inhabited their world. In this way, the Druids were not only the spiritual leaders of the Celts, but also the guardians of their cultural and natural heritage. As we move forward in this journey to understand the Druids, we will see how this deep connection to nature and spirituality shaped their roles within Celtic society. The world they inhabited, with its sacred groves and ancient rituals, was one that was vastly different from our own, yet the legacy of the Druids continues to resonate with us today. Their wisdom and their reverence of the earth remain a timeless reminder of the spiritual and natural forces that govern our world. The question, who were the Druids, has intrigued historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts for centuries. Despite their central role in ancient Celtic society, the Druids remain one of the most mysterious and misunderstood groups in history. Part of their mystique lies in the fact that much of what we know about them comes from external sources, primarily Roman accounts, which were often biased and written from the perspective of those who sought to suppress them. The Druids themselves did not leave behind any written records. So much of what we know is based on fragments of historical texts, oral traditions, and interpretations that have evolved over time. The Druids were a class of religious leaders, philosophers, teachers, judges, and healers within the ancient Celtic societies of Europe. They were the intellectual and spiritual elite, holding a revered position among their people. But the specifics of who they were, how they lived, what they truly believed, and what their daily lives entailed, remain largely shrouded in mystery. What we do know, however, paint a picture of a highly influential and deeply spiritual group of individuals, whose role went far beyond the rituals they performed or the religious ceremonies they led. To begin, the Druids were, first and foremost, religious leaders. They were the ones who led the spiritual practices of the Celtic people, offering prayers and sacrifices to gods, performing rites of passage, and overseeing the religious calendar. The Celtic belief system was polytheistic, and the gods they worshipped were connected to the natural world. The Druids were the intermediaries between the human and divine realms, entrusted with maintaining harmony between the gods and the people. Their knowledge of the natural world was considered sacred, and they were believed to have the ability to communicate with nature's spirits, the forces of the earth, and even the ancestors. The Druids were also the intellectuals and philosophers of their time. In a society that did not rely on written language, the Druids were the keepers of knowledge. They memorized vast amounts of information, including the myths, laws, and genealogies of the Celtic tribes. Their teachings were passed down orally, through lengthy memorization processes that could take years or even decades to master. This oral tradition was considered sacred in itself, as the spoken word was thought to have a powerful, almost magical quality. The Druids were regarded as wise men and women who held the secrets of the universe and the natural world. They were also historians, preserving the stories and legacies of their people, ensuring that the past was never forgotten. In addition to their religious and intellectual roles, the Druids also served as judges and mediators in disputes. They were responsible for maintaining order in society and ensuring that justice was served. In the absence of written legal code, the Druids acted as arbiters, using their deep knowledge of custom and tradition to settle conflicts. Their word was law, and their decisions were respected and revered. The Druids' role as judges was not just a matter of administering legal matters. It was also about maintaining the moral and ethical framework that governed the Celtic tribes. The Druids were seen as guardians of justice, their wisdom ensuring that balance was maintained within the community. Moreover, the Druids were healers. Their deep knowledge of the natural world extended to the medicinal properties of plants, herbs, and other natural substances. They were the primary healers in Celtic society, using their understanding of plants and natural remedies to treat illness and injury. Their skills in healing were considered both practical and magical, as they were believed to be able to call upon the forces of nature to restore balance and health to the body. The Druids' knowledge of herbal medicine and healing practices was passed down through generations, and many of their remedies were considered to be powerful tools for maintaining health and well-being. Despite their central role in society, much of the Druids' life remains elusive due to the lack of written records. The Druids themselves did not record their teachings or rituals in any permanent form, adhering to an oral tradition that was meant to preserve knowledge in the minds of the initiated. This reliance on memory and oral transmission may be one of the reasons why so much of their culture was lost to time. What we know about them comes primarily from accounts written by outsiders, and often these accounts were influenced by the biases of the writers. For example, the Romans, who sought to conquer and subjugate the Celtic tribes, portrayed the Druids as dangerous and barbaric figures, particularly emphasizing the supposed practice of human sacrifice. While there is evidence to suggest that the Druids did perform sacrifices, the nature of these rituals and their significance is still a subject of debate among scholars. The Roman historian Julius Caesar, in his Commentarii de Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic War, provides one of the most famous early accounts of the Druids. In his writings, Caesar describes the Druids as leaders who had great influence over the Celtic tribes, even in matters of war and politics. He also describes their religious practices, including their ritual sacrifices. Caesar's portrayal, however, was colored by his imperial perspective, as he viewed the Druids as a significant obstacle to Roman expansion. It is important to note that Caesar's writings are not objective historical records, but rather political documents aimed at justifying Roman conquest. Thus, his descriptions of the Druids must be taken with caution. Other Roman writers, such as Tacitus, also mention the Druids, but their accounts are often similarly influenced by their Roman worldview. These external accounts, while valuable, provide only a partial picture of the Druids and their society. It is likely that much of what the Romans misunderstood or exaggerated about the Druids stemmed from their own cultural bias, viewing Druidic rituals through the lens of Roman religious practices, which were vastly different. What we do know, however, suggests that the Druids were a highly respected and influential class in Celtic society. They were seen as the bridge between the human and the divine, holding a unique position of power and reverence. Their influence was not just spiritual, but also intellectual, judicial, and medical. They were the spiritual leaders of their people, the wise sages who interpreted the natural world and the will of the gods. Their role was central to the functioning of Celtic society, and their wisdom was sought after by kings, chieftains, and common folk alike. In the centuries following the Roman conquest of Celtic lands, the Druids gradually disappeared from the historical record. Roman suppression, combined with the rise of Christianity, led to the decline of Druidic practices. The Christian Church, which viewed the Druids as pagan figures, sought to eliminate their influence and convert the Celtic tribes to Christianity. This period of religious upheaval, coupled with a lack of written records, led to the eventual disappearance of the Druids as a distinct group. Yet, the memory of the Druids has not vanished entirely. Over the centuries, they have become a symbol of ancient wisdom, magic, and mystery. Their image has been romanticized and reimagined in various ways, from the medieval tales of Merlin, the legendary Druidic figure, to the modern revival of Druidic traditions in contemporary spirituality. While much of the truth about the Druids may be lost to history, their legacy lives on in the myths, stories, and traditions that have been passed down through the ages. As we continue our exploration of the Druids, we will see how these mysterious figures were not just religious leaders, but also cultural icons, whose influence shaped the ancient Celtic world in ways that are still felt today. Through the fragments of history that remain, we can begin to piece together a more complete picture of who the Druids were and what they meant to the people they served. While their true nature may remain a mystery, the legacy of the Druids endures as a testament to their wisdom, their connection to the natural world, and their role in shaping the spiritual and intellectual life of the Celts. The Druids were not just religious figures or mystical seers. They were the very backbone of ancient Celtic society. Their influence reached across nearly every facet of life, from governance and law to education and medicine. To understand the full extent of the Druids' role, we must step beyond a common image of them as simple priests and dive into their multifaceted presence in Celtic communities. The Druids were a unique class within the Celtic world, holding positions of immense power and respect that few other groups could match. Their impact extended far beyond spiritual matters. They were key advisors, healers, teachers, and lawmakers, shaping the very structure of society in ways that were deeply interconnected with the rhythms of the natural world. At the heart of their societal influence was their role as spiritual leaders. They were the guardians of the ancient Celtic belief system, one that was rooted deeply in nature and the cycles of life. The Druids performed rituals, ceremonies, and sacrifices, all aimed at maintaining the balance between the human world and the divine. Their role in these religious practices was not just ceremonial. They were seen as the intermediaries between God, spirits, and the people. The Druids were called upon to ensure that nature's balance was preserved, that the crops would grow, the rivers would flow, and the animals would thrive. They performed rituals to honor the gods, ensure good harvests, and offer protection to the people. In many ways, the Druids were the spiritual gatekeepers, ensuring the well-being of their communities through their connection to the divine. But the Druids' influence went far beyond religion. They were also deeply involved in the intellectual and educational life of their communities. In a time before written language was common, the Druids were the keepers of knowledge. They were historians, philosophers, and educators, responsible for passing down the wisdom and traditions of the Celtic people. Their knowledge encompassed a wide range of subjects, from astronomy and medicine to law and social customs. The Druids were the primary source of education, and their teachings were considered sacred. Young men, often from noble families, would spend years in the training of the Druids, learning not only the secrets of the natural world, but also the social and moral codes that governed their society. In many ways, the Druids were the intellectual elite of the Celtic world. Their education was rigorous, demanding an immense commitment of time and memory. The training process was an oral one, with the Druids memorizing vast amounts of knowledge, including genealogies, myths, poetry, and laws. It is said that some Druidic apprentices spent up to 20 years in training, learning everything from the medicinal properties of plants to the complex social hierarchies of the Celtic tribes. This deep intellectual training allowed the Druids to be the primary source of counsel for kings, chieftains, and tribal leaders, as their wisdom was seen as essential for the well-being of the tribe. The Druids' role as advisors was not limited to spiritual matters. They also played a central role in the governance of Celtic tribes. They were the counselors to kings and rulers, helping to make decisions on matters of law, warfare, and diplomacy. In fact, many of the early Celtic laws were shaped by the Druids, who were responsible for upholding the moral and ethical standards of society. The Druids were often called upon to mediate disputes and settle conflicts, ensuring that justice was served in a way that respected the customs and traditions of the tribe. Their word was considered final, and their decisions were respected by all, regardless of a person's rank or status within society. This role as arbiters of justice placed the Druids in a unique position within Celtic society. They were not only religious leaders, but also the enforcers of social norms and legal codes. In the absence of written laws, the Druids relied on their deep knowledge of custom and tradition to resolve disputes. They were seen as a living embodiment of the tribe's collective wisdom, entrusted with maintaining the moral fabric of society. This combination of spiritual authority and intellectual power gave the Druids an unparalleled influence over Celtic life, allowing them to shape the very structure of society. In addition to their roles as spiritual leaders, educators, and advisors, the Druids were also healers, deeply knowledgeable in the use of herbs, plants, and other natural remedies. Medicine in the Celtic world was closely tied to the spiritual realm, with healing practices often intertwined with religious rituals. The Druids had an intimate understanding of the natural world, and their knowledge of medicinal plants was highly regarded. They were responsible for treating the sick and injured, using their knowledge of herbal remedies to restore health. This role as healers added another layer to their societal influence, as they were often the only ones with the skills to provide medical care in times of illness or injury. The Druids' connection to the land and nature played a significant part in their healing practices. In the Celtic worldview, nature was sacred, and everything, be it plants, animals, or minerals, was infused with spiritual significance. The Druids understood the power of plants to heal the body, and they used their knowledge of natural remedies to cure ailments ranging from wounds and infections to mental health issues. Many of the herbs and plants used by the Druids in their healing rituals were believed to have mystical properties, enhancing their power to heal and restore balance to the body. Their healing practices were often performed in sacred groves or by holy springs, spaces that were imbued with spiritual significance. The Druids were also deeply involved in the social and cultural life of the community. Their role as keepers of oral tradition meant that they were responsible for preserving the myths, stories, and genealogies of the Celtic people. These stories were not only a means of passing down history, but also a way to instill moral values and reinforce the social structure of the tribe. The Druids were the storytellers, passing on the collective wisdom of their people through song, poetry, and narrative. They were the custodians of cultural memory, ensuring that the traditions and values of the past were never forgotten. The Druids' cultural significance extended to their role in the arts. They were often poets, musicians, and composers, creating works of great beauty that celebrated the natural world and the heroic deeds of their ancestors. Music and poetry were integral parts of Druidic rituals, and many of the ceremonies involved the recitation of sacred verses or the playing of musical instruments. These artistic expressions were not just forms of entertainment, but were believed to have spiritual power, invoking the gods and spirits to bless the people and the land. The Druids' influence, however, was not without its challenges. As the Roman Empire expanded and began to encroach on Celtic territories, The Druids found themselves at odds with the new political and religious order. The Romans, who viewed Druidic practices as a threat to their imperial control, sought to suppress the Druids and their influence. Roman writers, particularly Julius Caesar, recorded their disdain for the Druids, depicting them as dangerous and barbaric figures. Over time, the Roman suppression, combined with the rise of Christianity, led to the decline of Druidic practices. The Druids were forced into hiding, their knowledge and influence gradually fading from the historical record. Despite this decline, the legacy of the Druids has endured through the ages. Their role as spiritual leaders, intellectuals, and guardians of culture left an indelible mark on the Celtic world. The influence of the Druids can still be felt today in the stories, myths, and rituals that continue to shape our understanding of ancient Celtic life. Their connection to nature, their wisdom, and their role in shaping society remind us of a time when the boundaries between the human and the spiritual were not as sharply defined, and when the world was seen as a living, breathing entity, full of mystery and magic. The beliefs and practices of the Druids were deeply intertwined with the natural world, forming the foundation of their spiritual and philosophical worldview. To understand the Druids' role in ancient Celtic society, it is essential to explore their core beliefs, the rituals they performed, and how they viewed the world around them. The Druids were not only religious leaders, but also stewards of a worldview that placed nature at the center of existence. Their practices were as much about connecting with the divine as they were about fostering harmony with the earth. Their worldview was rooted in a complex system of spiritual beliefs that blended reverence for nature, the gods, the ancestors, and the cycles of life. At the core of Druidic belief was a deep reverence for the natural world. The Celts viewed nature as sacred, and the Druids were its spiritual intermediaries. They believed that everything in nature, trees, rivers, animals, stones, and even the wind, was imbued with spirit. The Druids saw nature not as a backdrop for human life, but as an active participant in the cosmic order. The seasons, the sun, the moon, and the stars all played a crucial role in the Druidic cosmology. Each aspect of nature had its own spiritual significance, and it was the role of the Druid to understand and honor these forces. The earth was seen as a living, breathing entity, and everything on it was interconnected. This holistic worldview led the Druids to believe that humans, as part of nature, had a responsibility to live in harmony with it, rather than to dominate or exploit it. The most important feature of Druidic belief was their reverence for trees. Among the Celts, trees were considered sacred, and the Druids had a particular affinity for the oak tree, which they believed was the most powerful of all. The oak was seen as a symbol of strength, endurance, and spiritual wisdom. It was believed that the oak tree could connect the earth and the heavens, providing a pathway for the gods and spirits to communicate with the human world. The Druids often conducted their rituals in oak groves, which were seen as holy places where the veil between the physical and spiritual realms was thin. Other trees, such as the yew, ash, and hazel, were also of great significance, and the Druids understood the special properties each tree had, both in terms of its spiritual meaning and its practical uses in medicine and magic. The Druidic understanding of time was cyclical rather than linear, reflecting their deep connection to the rhythms of nature. Their calendar was based on the movements of the sun and moon, with major festivals marking the key points of the agricultural and solar year. These festivals were not only celebrations of the changing seasons, but also opportunities to honor the gods and spirits that govern the cycles of life. The Druids celebrated the solstices and equinoxes, as well as the transitions between the seasons. Each festival had its own set of rituals, many of which were performed in sacred spaces like stone circles, hilltops, or groves of trees. The most important of these festivals were Samhain, celebrated on November 1st, Imbolc, February 1st, Beltane, May 1st, and Lughnasadh, August 1st, all of which marked significant shifts in the agricultural year, such as planting, harvesting, and the transition between light and dark. Samhain, which marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter, was one of the most significant Druidic festivals. It was believed that the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was thinnest at this time, allowing spirits to cross over into the mortal realm. The Druids would perform rituals to honor the dead and to protect the living from any malevolent spirits that might roam the earth. Fire played an important role in this celebration, as it was seen as a purifying force capable of driving away evil and ensuring prosperity in the coming year. Another key aspect of Druidic belief was their connection to the concept of the soul. The Druids believed in the immortality of the soul and in the idea of reincarnation. The cycle of life and death was seen as a continuous journey, with the soul passing from one body to the next. This belief in the eternal nature of the soul made the Druids especially attuned to the idea of ancestral spirits. The ancestors were believed to have an ongoing presence in the world, and it was the role of the Druids to maintain communication with them. Ancestor worship was an essential part of Druidic practice, and many rituals were performed to honor the spirits of the deceased and to seek their guidance. The Druids were also skilled in the art of divination, using various methods to interpret the will of the gods and the spirits. One of the most well-known methods was the use of Ogham, an ancient alphabet of sacred symbols carved into wood, stones, or sticks. The Druids would use Ogham to create divinatory messages, interpreting the symbols to gain insight into the future or to understand the divine will. They also practiced other forms of divination, such as reading the patterns in the flight of birds or interpreting the signs in nature. The Druids believed that the gods communicated with them through signs and omens, and their ability to interpret these messages was one of the key reasons they were so revered. Rituals were an integral part of Druidic practice, and they were conducted at key points in the year at important life events and in response to specific needs. These rituals were often performed in natural settings, such as groves, rivers, and hilltops, where the Druids believed the spiritual energies of the land were most potent. The rituals themselves were varied, but they often involved prayers, invocations, sacrifices, and symbolic acts designed to maintain balance and harmony between the human and spiritual worlds. One of the most famous, albeit controversial, aspects of Druidic practice was human sacrifice. While Roman and later Christian writers focus on this aspect of Druidic rituals, the actual extent of these practices is debated by scholars. Some believe that the sacrifices were symbolic or performed in extreme circumstances, while others argue that they may have been more common, particularly during times of war or great distress. What is clear, however, is that the Druids believed in the power of sacrifice, whether of animals or, in some cases, humans, to maintain the favor of the gods and to ensure the health and prosperity of the community. The Druids' role as custodians of sacred knowledge extended beyond their spiritual and ritual practices. They were also deeply involved in the magical and mystical aspect of the world, using their understanding of nature's forces to influence the physical world. Magic, in the Druidic sense, was not about casting spells in the way we might think of today. It was about working in harmony with the natural and spiritual forces that govern the world. The Druids were seen as having the ability to harness the energies of the earth and sky, using them for healing, protection, and guidance. They also used their magical knowledge to help guide the rulers and warriors, offering counsel on matters of strategy, leadership, and warfare. Despite the fascination with Druidic magic and mysticism, it is important to remember that their practices were grounded in the reality of the world they lived in. The Druids were not just spiritual guides or magicians. They were practical people who understood the natural world in ways that were far ahead of their time. Their knowledge of plants, herbs, and natural remedies made them the healers of their communities, and their understanding of the cycles of nature allowed them to guide agricultural practices and ensure the survival of the tribes. In conclusion, the beliefs and practices of the Druids were centered on a profound understanding of the natural world, the cycles of life, and the spiritual forces that govern existence. They saw themselves as the caretakers of sacred knowledge, charged with maintaining harmony between the physical and spiritual realms. Whether through their rituals, their connection to the land, their divination practices, or their role in maintaining balance and justice, the Druids played a central role in the lives of the ancient Celts. Their legacy, though obscure by time, continues to capture the imagination of those who seek to understand the ancient wisdom they left behind. Druidic rituals and festivals were the heartbeat of ancient Celtic spirituality, deeply tied to land and the natural cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The Druids believed that the world was not a static entity but a dynamic, ever-changing system of forces that demanded constant attention and reverence. These rituals were designed to align the human world with the divine, creating a harmonious relationship between the Celts and the forces of nature. Each ritual had its own unique significance, and the festivals were key moments in the Druidic calendar, marking important transitions in both the natural and spiritual worlds. At the center of Druidic practice was a belief that everything in the universe was interconnected, The gods, spirits, ancestors, and nature itself were all part of a vast, living web of existence. The Druids saw themselves as mediators between these realms, responsible for maintaining balance and ensuring that the cosmic order was upheld. They understood that the success of the community, whether in terms of crops, health, or prosperity, depended on maintaining the favor of the gods and the spirits of nature. This belief formed the foundation for many of their rituals, which are performed to honor the gods, seek guidance, and ensure the continued well-being of the people. One of the most important elements of Druidic rituals was the use of sacred spaces. The Druids believed that certain locations were imbued with spiritual power, and many of their rituals were conducted in these sacred sites. Groves of trees, particularly oak groves, were considered the most sacred of places, as the oak tree was revered as a symbol of strength, wisdom, and spiritual connection. Other sacred locations included rivers, lakes, and hilltops, places that were thought to be gateways between the human world and the spiritual realm. These locations were often chosen for their natural beauty and the sense of timelessness they conveyed. The Druids believed that performing rituals in these sacred spaces helped to strengthen the connection between the human world and the divine. The festivals were the focal points of Druidic religious life. These celebrations marked key moments in the agricultural calendar, as well as the changing seasons. They were opportunities for the community to come together, to give thanks for the abundance of the earth, and to prepare for the challenges ahead. Each festival had its own specific rituals and customs, but all shared a common theme of honoring the natural world and the spiritual forces that governed it. The four major festivals of the Druidic calendar were Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh. Each of these festivals was tied to a specific phase of the agricultural year, and they marked the transitions between the seasons of the year. These festivals were not merely social occasions. They were deeply spiritual events, centered around rituals that sought to align human activity with the natural world. Samhain, celebrated around November 1st, marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. It was a time of darkness, as the light of the sun waned and the long nights of winter took hold. For the Celts, Samhain was also the time when the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead was at its thinnest. The Druids believed that the spirits of the deceased could cross over into the world of the living, and they performed rituals to honor these ancestors and protect the living from any malevolent spirits that might wander the earth. Bonfires were lit to symbolize the light of the sun, and people would gather around them to celebrate, dance, and give thanks for the harvest. Animals were often sacrificed during Samhain, as the Celts believed that this act would ensure a prosperous winter. Imbolc, celebrated around February 1st, was a festival of purification and renewal. It marked the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, signaling the first stirrings of life after the long winter months. Imbolc was associated with the goddess Brigid, who represented fertility, healing, and the hearth. Fires were lit to honor Brigid, and rituals were performed to purify the land and the people in preparation for the new growth of spring. It was a time for healing and for sowing the seeds of new life, both literally and metaphorically. The festival of Imbolc was also associated with the blessing of the flocks, particularly sheep, as the Celts were heavily dependent on their livestock for food and clothing. Beltane, celebrated around May 1st, was a festival of fertility and growth. It marked the beginning of the warmer months and the period of abundance that came with the growing season. Beltane was a time for celebrating the power of life and creation. Bonfires were once again lit, symbolizing the warmth and vitality of the sun. People would dance around the fires, often in pairs, to invoke fertility and ensure a bountiful harvest. Cattle were driven between two large bonfires as a form of ritual purification, believed to protect them from disease and ensure their fertility. Beltane was a festival of sexual energy and vitality, a celebration of life in all its forms. Lughnasadh, celebrated around August 1st, was a harvest festival. It marked the beginning of the harvest season, particularly the grain harvest. This was a time of thanksgiving for the abundance of the earth and the first fruits of the harvest. The festival was named after the god Lugh, who was associated with light craftsmanship and skill. Offerings of grain, fruits, and other harvest goods were made to the gods, and the community came together to feast and share the bounty of the earth. Rituals were performed to ensure the continued fertility of the land and to honor the gods for their blessings. Lughnasadh was also a time for athletic competitions and feasting, as it was a celebration of both the bounty of the land and the strength of the community. In addition to these four major festivals, the Druids also observed other rites and rituals throughout the year. These included rituals to mark the changing phases of the moon, as well as specific rites of passage, such as births, marriages, and deaths. The Druidic understanding of time was not just based on the solar year, but also on the lunar cycle. The full moon, in particular, was seen as a powerful time for rituals of divination, healing, and communication with the divine. The moon was associated with the feminine, the mysterious, and the intuitive, and its cycles were seen as a reflection of the cycles of life and death. The rituals performed by the Druids were often shrouded in mystery, as they were closely guarded secrets. The Druids believed that the power of a ritual lay in its secrecy, and they were careful to ensure that only those who were properly initiated into their teachings could participate in these sacred practices. Rituals can involve a range of activities, from chanting and singing to dancing, prayer, and offerings. Many rituals also involve the use of sacred objects, such as stones, herbs, and other natural materials, which were believed to hold special powers. These objects were used in the performance of rituals to invoke the spirits, to purify the land, and to communicate with the divine. In conclusion, Druidic rituals and festivals were not merely ceremonial. They were deeply embedded in the fabric of Celtic life. They marked the rhythms of the seasons, the agricultural cycle, and the connection between the human and the divine. Through these rituals, the Druids sought to maintain harmony with nature, to honor the gods and ancestors, and to ensure the prosperity and well-being of their people. Whether through the major festivals of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, or the everyday rituals of prayer, sacrifice, and purification, the Druids played a central role in shaping the spiritual and cultural life of the Celts. These rituals and festivals were not only a means of honoring the gods, but also a way to create a sense of community and continuity, connecting the present generation with the past and the future. The decline of the Druids is one of the most fascinating and tragic chapters in the history of ancient Celtic culture. The Druids, who once wielded immense spiritual, intellectual, and political power within Celtic societies, gradually faded from prominence over several centuries, largely due to external pressures, particularly from Roman conquest and the rise of Christianity. Their disappearance was not sudden, but the result of a long process of suppression and cultural transformation, which left the Druids marginalized and their practices relegated to the shadows of history. The story of the decline of the Druids is thus intertwined with the broader history of the Celts and their encounter with the forces of empire, colonization, and religious transformation. The first significant blow to Druidic culture came with the expansion of the Roman Empire. As the Romans began to conquer Celtic lands in the 1st century BCE, they encountered the Druids as a powerful and influential force within Celtic society. The Druids were not just religious figures. They were deeply involved in the political and social life of their tribes. The Romans viewed the Druids with suspicion and hostility, seeing them as a threat to their imperial ambitions. The Druids' strong influence over the Celtic tribes, their role as spiritual leaders and arbitrators of justice, and their ability to rally warriors in defense of the Celtic way of life posed a challenge to Roman control. The Roman authorities recognized that to fully subjugate the Celts, they needed to break the power of the Druids. Julius Caesar, in his Commentarii de Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic War, famously described the Druids as having considerable influence over the Celtic tribes of Gaul, claiming that they were instrumental in the social and political cohesion of the Celtic communities. He also noted their role in religious rituals, including human sacrifices, which he depicted as barbaric and in need of eradication. Caesar's writings reflect the Roman disdain for the Druids, which was shared by many Romans who sought to portray them as backward, superstitious, and dangerous. This portrayal was part of a broader Roman agenda to legitimize the conquest of Celtic lands and the imposition of Roman culture and religion. In response to this perceived threat, the Romans took decisive action to suppress the Druids. One of the most significant events in the decline of the Druids was the Roman Emperor Tiberius's ban on Druidic practices in 58 BCE. The Romans made it illegal for the Druids to perform their sacred rituals, and they actively sought to destroy Druidic centers of power. In the British Isles, the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus led a brutal campaign against the Druids in 60 to 61 CE, targeting the sacred groves on the Isle of Anglesey, which was a stronghold of Druidic activity. According to Roman accounts, the Druids fought fiercely against the Roman invaders, using their influence to rally the Celtic tribes to resist Roman occupation. However, despite their efforts, the Romans succeeded in their assault, and the sacred groves were destroyed, marking a significant blow to Druidic religious practices. The destruction of the sacred groves on Anglesey, which had been a major center of Druidic power, was a symbolic act that represented the beginning of the end for Druidic influence in the Celtic world. The Roman victory at Anglesey effectively severed the connection between the Celts and their spiritual leaders, dealing a severe blow to the cultural and religious fabric of the Celtic people. The Roman conquest of Britain and Gaul further weakened Druidic institutions, as Roman rule imposed a new system of governance, law, and religion that marginalized the Druids and their way of life. However, the decline of the Druids was not solely due to Roman military power. The rise of Christianity also played a crucial role in the suppression of Druidic practices. As the Roman Empire adopted Christianity as its official religion in the 4th century CE, the spread of Christianity among the Celtic tribes further eroded the power and influence of the Druids. Christianity, with its monotheistic beliefs and rejection of pagan practices, viewed the Druidic religion as a form of idolatry. Early Christian missionaries, including figures like St. Patrick in Ireland, sought to convert the Celtic peoples and replace the old pagan beliefs with Christian teachings. In Ireland, where Druidic traditions had remained strong, Christianity was gradually accepted by the population, and many of the old Druidic practices were incorporated into Christian rituals and beliefs. The process of Christianization in Ireland was relatively peaceful compared to the violent Roman conquests, but it still had a profound impact on the Druids. The Christian church established its own clergy, which replaced the Druids as the spiritual leaders of the community. Over time, the Christian church became the dominant religious institution, and the old Druidic practices were either abandoned or relegated to the realm of folklore and superstition. The Christian church's efforts to suppress Druidic practices were not limited to Ireland. In Britain and Gaul, Christian missionaries worked to replace the ancient pagan religions with Christianity. The destruction of Druidic sacred sites, such as groves and shrines, was part of a broader effort to eradicate paganism and promote the worship of the Christian God. The Druidic gods, spirits, and rituals were systematically replaced by Christian saints and religious practices. Over time, the Druidic religion was driven underground, and the once vibrant spiritual traditions of the Celts were lost to history. While the decline of the Druids is often attributed to forces of Roman imperialism and Christianization, it is important to recognize that Druidic practices did not completely vanish. In some remote regions, particularly in the Celtic fringes of the British Isles, the old beliefs and practices survived in a more localized form, often hidden from the eyes of the Roman and later Christian authorities. Even as the Druids disappeared as a formal class, elements of their spirituality and knowledge continued to influence the culture and folklore of the Celts. The legacy of the Druids was not erased entirely. In the medieval period, the figure of the Druid was transformed into a legendary archetype, particularly in the works of poets, historians, and scholars. The Druids became symbols of ancient wisdom, and their connection to nature, magic, and the mystical world was romanticized. The figure of Merlin, the legendary wizard of Arthurian legend, was one such example of the Druidic archetype, though it is unclear how closely he reflected the actual practices of the ancient Druids. During the Renaissance and later periods, there was a renewed interest in Druidism, particularly as part of the broader fascination with ancient cultures and esoteric knowledge. In modern times, Druidism has experienced a revival, particularly in the form of neo-Druidic movements. These modern Druids, inspired by the ancient practices but adapted to contemporary beliefs, have formed groups and organizations that seek to reconnect with the spiritual traditions of the Celts. They celebrate the seasonal festivals, honor nature, and explore the mystical aspects of Druidic belief, though it is important to note that these modern practices differ significantly from the ancient rituals. Neo-Druidism is not a direct continuation of ancient Druidic traditions, but rather a modern reinterpretation of them. In conclusion, the decline of the Druids was a complex process that unfolded over centuries. The combined forces of Roman conquest, Christianization, and cultural transformation ultimately led to the marginalization and disappearance of Druidic institutions. However, the influence of Druids did not vanish entirely. Their legacy lives on in the folklore, traditions, and spiritual practices of the Celtic peoples, as well as in the modern-day interest in Druidic history and mythology. Though their rituals and beliefs were suppressed and eventually replaced by other systems of thought, the memory of the Druids remains a powerful symbol of ancient wisdom and a testament to the enduring connection between humans and the natural world. The legacy of the ancient Druids has endured in modern culture in surprising and multifaceted ways, shaping not only our understanding of ancient spirituality and practices, but also influencing art, literature, and contemporary spiritual movements. Though the Druids themselves disappeared from the historical stage centuries ago, the echoes of their wisdom, rituals, and connection to nature continue to resonate, inspiring curiosity and reverence. The enduring fascination with the Druids can be seen in a variety of forms, from their role in mythology and literature to their influence on modern-day pagan and spiritual movements. This section will explore the lasting impact of the Druids in modern culture, how their image has been reinterpreted, and why their legacy remains so compelling today. In literature, the image of the Druid has been transformed and romanticized over the centuries. The medieval period saw the Druids take on a legendary status, often portrayed as wise sages and magical figures whose mystical powers were linked to the natural world. This portrayal was popularized in the Arthurian legends, particularly through the character of Merlin. Merlin, the wise and enigmatic wizard of the Arthurian cycle, is often depicted as a Druidic figure, although his role in the stories is more symbolic of the Druid archetype than an accurate reflection of ancient practices. Merlin's association with nature, his prophetic abilities, and his deep understanding of the natural world closely mirror the qualities attributed to the ancient Druids. Over time, Merlin and other figures like him became emblematic of the mysticism and wisdom that the Druids were believed to embody. The 19th and 20th centuries saw a resurgence of interest in the Druids, particularly in the context of the Romantic movement. This was a period when many intellectuals and artists began to look back at ancient cultures, including the Celts, with a sense of nostalgia and reverence. The Druids were often idealized as the embodiment of a pure, untamed connection to nature, in stark contrast to the industrialization and urbanization that were rapidly changing the world. Writers, poets, and artists began to depict the Druids as symbols of a lost golden age, one in which humans live in harmony with the earth and the forces of nature. This portrayal contributed to the growing fascination with Druidic wisdom, and the Druids became associated with a kind of spiritual authenticity that was increasingly absent from modern life. One of the most notable examples of Druidic influence in modern literature is found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, whose fantasy epics The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are filled with characters and themes that echo Druidic beliefs. Tolkien, who was deeply influenced by ancient mythologies, particularly those of the Celts, incorporated elements of Druidic spirituality into his creation of Middle-earth. The elves in Tolkien's works, for example, exhibit many qualities that are reminiscent of Druids: a deep connection to nature, a profound understanding of the natural world, and ethereal, otherworldly wisdom. While Tolkien did not explicitly identify the elves as Druids, their spiritual and cultural qualities mirror the reverence for nature and the mystical practices associated with ancient Celtic religion. Additionally, the figures of Gandalf and Radagast, two wizards in Lord of the Rings, also exhibit characteristics that align with Druidic archetypes: wise, nature-loving figures who are deeply attuned to the rhythms of the earth. Beyond literature, the Druids have also left their mark on modern popular culture, particularly in the realms of film, television, and fantasy genres. Movies and TV shows that feature magic, ancient wisdom, and mystical beings often include characters inspired by the Druidic archetype. These characters are typically portrayed as wise, mysterious figures who are deeply connected to nature and hold ancient knowledge. The 1980s television show The Secret of the Sword and the more recent Merlin series, for example, depict Druid-like figures who possess powerful magic and an intimate connection with the earth. This modern portrayal draws from both the romanticized image of the Druids as mystical sages and the more contemporary reinterpretation of their spiritual and ecological significance. Another key area where the legacy of the Druids continues to thrive is in modern-day spirituality. In the 19th and 20th centuries, with the rise of various occult and neo-pagan movements, there was a renewed interest in Druidism, which led to the formation of neo-Druidic practices. These modern Druids, while not directly descended from the ancient order, sought to revive and reinterpret the spiritual practices and beliefs of the ancient Celts. Neo-Druidism, a contemporary spiritual movement, has gained traction in the last century, particularly in Western countries, as part of broader resurgence of interest in nature-based and earth-centered religions. Modern Druids tend to focus on the worship of nature, reverence of the earth, and a connection to the cycles of the seasons. They celebrate the four main festivals of the Druidic calendar: Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, often gathering in sacred natural spaces like groves, hills, and stone circles to perform rituals that honor the changing seasons and the natural world. These modern rituals, while influenced by ancient practices, are adapted to contemporary concerns, such as environmentalism, personal spiritual growth, and the protection of the planet. For many modern Druids, their practices represent a form of spiritual ecology, one that emphasizes the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of living in harmony with the natural world. In this sense, modern Druidism offers a counterbalance to the disconnection many people feel from nature in an increasingly industrialized and urbanized world. The modern Druidic revival has also been closely linked to the larger neo-pagan movement, particularly through practices of Wicca and other forms of paganism that celebrate nature worship. Wiccans, for example, often incorporate elements of Druidic ritual into their practices, celebrating the cycles of the moon, the elements, and the sacredness of the earth. These modern pagan movements, which place a strong emphasis on individual spirituality and a personal connection to the divine, often look to Druids as a source of inspiration for their reverence of nature and the divine feminine. The Druidic legacy is also present in the way we view certain historical and archaeological sites. Stone circles, burial mounds, and other ancient monuments that were once associated with the Druids continue to captivate people today. Sites like Stonehenge, Avebury, and the Standing Stones of Brittany are often linked to the Druids, despite the fact that the true role of these structures in Druidic practice remains unclear. Nonetheless, these monuments have become symbols of Druidic power and wisdom, and modern Druids often gather at these sites for seasonal rituals or to honor the ancient traditions. The connection between these sacred sites and the Druidic legacy reinforces the idea that the Druids were not just religious leaders, but also cultural stewards, preserving sacred places that held spiritual significance for their people. In conclusion, the legacy of the Druids in modern culture is rich and multifaceted, stretching across literature, popular culture, spirituality, and even environmentalism. The romanticized image of the Druid as a wise, nature-loving figure has endured through centuries, influencing everything from medieval legends to modern fantasy literature. Neo-Druidic movements, which seek to revive the spiritual practices of the ancient Druids, continue to attract followers who are drawn to the teachings of nature, ecology, and personal spiritual connection. While the historical Druids themselves may have vanished from the world stage, their legacy persists in the collective imagination and in the spiritual practices of those who continue to seek wisdom from the earth and the natural world. The enduring fascination with the Druids is a testament to the timeless appeal of their connection to nature, magic, and the mysteries of the universe. The legacy of the Druids has left an indelible mark on modern paganism, particularly in the context of nature-based spirituality. As one of the most significant and enigmatic spiritual traditions of the ancient world, Druidism continues to influence contemporary pagan practices, offering a deep connection to nature, the cycles of the seasons, and the mysteries of the universe. While the Druids themselves vanished from the historical record centuries ago, their influence has endured to the resurgence of modern pagan movements that seek to reclaim the ancient wisdom of the Celts and the sacredness of the natural world. In this section, we explore how the ancient Druids' reverence for nature, their rituals, and their spiritual worldview continue to shape and inspire the practices of modern pagans. Modern paganism is a broad and diverse spiritual movement that encompasses a range of beliefs and practices, many of which are rooted in the veneration of nature, the reverence for the divine feminine, and the celebration of the cycles of the earth. One of the most influential forms of modern paganism is Wicca, a nature-based religion that emerged in the mid-20th century and draws heavily from ancient practices, including those of the Druids. Wicca emphasizes the worship of the goddess and god, often symbolized by the moon and the sun, and celebrates the natural world through rituals, festivals, and ceremonies that mirror the Druidic reverence for the changing seasons. The Druidic influence on modern paganism is particularly evident in the celebration of the 8 Sabbats, which form the core of the Wiccan Wheel of the Year. These Sabbats are based on the ancient festivals of the Celtic calendar and reflect the agricultural and seasonal rhythms that the Druids themselves would have honored. The festivals of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, which were central to the Druidic calendar, are also key observances in modern paganism, with each Sabbat marking an important turning point in the cycle of the year. Samhain, celebrated on the evening of October 31st to November 1st, is perhaps the most well-known of the Druidic festivals, as it marks the end of the harvest and the beginning of the dark half of the year. For modern pagans, Samhain represents a time of reflection, honoring the ancestors, and acknowledging the cyclical nature of life and death. This festival, often seen as the Wiccan New Year, is celebrated with rituals that invoke the spirits of the deceased and honor the continuity of life beyond the physical realm. The connection between Samhain and the Druidic tradition is especially strong, as the ancient Celts believed that on this night, the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest, allowing for communication with the spirits of ancestors. Modern pagans continue this tradition by lighting candles, creating altars, and performing rituals to honor the deceased, reinforcing the Druidic belief in the cyclical nature of existence. Imbolc, celebrated on February 1st, marks the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. In Druidic times, it was a festival of purification and renewal dedicated to the goddess Brigid, who was associated with fertility, healing, and the hearth. In modern paganism, Imbolc continues to be a time of cleansing, new beginnings, and the stirring of life beneath the surface of the earth. Rituals often involve lighting candles to symbolize the return of light, as well as offering prayers for the coming of spring. For modern pagans, Imbolc is a celebration of hope and renewal, with an emphasis on personal growth and spiritual awakening, concepts that echo the Druidic practices of honoring the cycles of nature and the changing seasons. Beltane, celebrated on May 1st, is a festival of fertility, passion, and growth. This Sabbat, which marks the beginning of the light half of the year, celebrates the blooming of life in all its forms. The Druidic celebration of Beltane included the lighting of bonfires, dancing, and the sacred union of the earth and the sun, symbolized by the maypole. For modern pagans, Beltane is a time of celebrating life's vitality, focusing on creativity, sensuality, and the flourishing of new beginnings. It is a time for honoring the earth's fertility, as well as cultivating personal desires and goals. The Druidic influence on Beltane is particularly strong, as it retains a focus on sacred sexuality, the natural world's power to create life, and the rejuvenation of the land and its people. Lughnasadh, which falls on August 1st, is the festival of the first harvest and marks the beginning of the grain harvest. This festival is a time of thanksgiving for the abundance of the earth, and often involves feasting, dancing, and the offering of gratitude for fruits of the land. For modern pagans, Lughnasadh is a time to celebrate the fruits of one's labor and to honor the earth's gifts. It is a moment of harvest, not only in terms of crops, but also in terms of personal achievements and spiritual growth. Rituals during the Sabbath often include sharing food, giving thanks, and preparing for the challenges that lie ahead. The Druidic focus on the cycles of the earth, fertility, and agricultural abundance is clearly reflected in how Lughnasadh is celebrated by modern pagans today. These four festivals, Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, represent the cornerstone of modern pagan practices, and their connection to the ancient Druidic calendar is undeniable. They celebrate the key turning points in the cycle of the year, which was of paramount importance to the Druids. In Druidic culture, the movement of the seasons and the worship of the natural world were integral to their religious practices. Today, modern pagans continue to observe these festivals in ways that reflect the same deep respect for nature and the cyclical rhythms of the earth that the Druids once held dear. The influence of Druidism on modern paganism also extends beyond the festivals and rituals. The reverence for nature and the spiritual connection to the land are key aspects of contemporary pagan beliefs, and these ideas were central to the Druidic worldview. The Druids viewed nature as sacred, with every tree, river, and stone holding spiritual significance. The sacredness of trees, particularly the oak, ash, and yew, is an essential element of modern Druidic practice, as well as in paganism more broadly. Many modern pagans and neo-Druids continue to perform rituals in sacred groves, honoring the trees and the spirits of the land. The symbolism of trees as gateways to the divine remains a powerful image in modern spiritual practices. Another significant influence of Druidic thought in modern paganism is the emphasis on personal connection to the divine and the elements. Just as the Druids believed in the interconnectedness of all things, modern pagans see themselves as part of a living, breathing universe in which every element, earth, air, fire, and water, has its own spiritual significance. Rituals that honor the elements are an important part of modern pagan practices, and they echo the Druidic belief that the natural world is infused with divine energy. These elements are seen as both physical and spiritual forces, connecting practitioners to the forces of nature and the cycles of life. The Druidic emphasis on divination and the use of symbols and tools such as Ogham, the Druidic alphabet, has also been adopted by many modern pagans. The use of divinatory tools, such as tarot cards, runes, and pendulums, is common in modern paganism and is influenced by the ancient Druidic practices of seeking guidance from the spiritual world. The Druidic tradition of reading the natural world for signs and omens has evolved into modern practices of divination, where pagans seek wisdom from the forces of nature and the unseen realms. In conclusion, the influence of the Druids on modern paganism is profound and multifaceted, shaping both the rituals and spiritual worldview of contemporary practitioners. The Druidic reverence for nature, the cycles of the seasons, and the divine energy within all things continues to inspire modern pagan beliefs and practices. From the celebration of the ancient festivals of the Wheel of the Year to the honoring of the sacredness of trees and the elements, modern paganism reflects the enduring wisdom of the Druids. While the ancient Druidic order may have disappeared, its spiritual legacy lives on, deeply embedded in the fabric of modern nature-based religions and the ongoing quest for a deeper connection to the earth and the divine. The Druidic worldview, with its deep reverence for nature and its understanding of the interconnectedness of all living things, has a profound and lasting influence on the environmental movements of the modern world. While the Druids themselves lived millennia ago, their spiritual practices, their focus on the cycles of the earth, and their respect for the natural world continue to resonate today, particularly in the context of contemporary environmentalism. In this section, we explore how the ancient Druidic teachings on nature, stewardship, and sustainability have influenced modern environmental thought, how the legacy of the Druids can inspire current efforts to protect the planet, and how modern Druidic movements contribute to a growing global consciousness of ecological responsibility. At the core of Druidic philosophy was a belief that the natural world was sacred. The Druids did not see themselves as separate from nature, but as an integral part of the web of life. The world was not merely a resource to be exploited, but a living, breathing entity that deserved respect and reverence. The Druids believed that all things, from the tallest tree to the smallest stone, had a spiritual essence. This understanding of the divine presence in all of creation created a foundation for a deeply ecological worldview, one in which the health of the natural world was inextricably linked to the health of the community and the individual. The Druidic reverence for nature was reflected in their rituals and practices. They conducted ceremonies in sacred groves, especially those of oak trees, which they saw as symbolic of strength and endurance. The oak, along with other trees like the ash, birch, and yew, were considered sacred, and the Druids believed that they contained wisdom and spiritual power. These trees were not just objects of worship. They were seen as teachers and guides, offering a connection between the human and the divine. The spiritual relationship the Druids maintained with these trees and the natural world as a whole reflects the values of ecological stewardship that are central to modern environmentalism. The Druidic approach to nature also involved a deep understanding of the cycles of the seasons. The Celts saw the year as a continuous cycle of birth, growth, death, and rebirth, with each season bringing its own unique energy and qualities. This cyclical view of time aligns closely with the principles of sustainability in modern environmental thought, which emphasizes a need to live in harmony with the Earth's natural cycles and rhythms. The Druids, through their seasonal festivals and rituals, honor the changing of the seasons, the movements of the sun, and the cycles of plant and animal life. These celebrations of the Earth's natural cycles serve as a reminder of the importance of working with nature, not against it, and of the need to recognize and respect the seasons of life and death in all living things. The four major festivals of the Druidic calendar, Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, were all deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth. These festivals, which mark key points in the agricultural cycle, highlight the Druids' profound awareness of the seasons and their impact on human life. The The focus on agricultural fertility and the cycles of planting and harvesting in these festivals mirrored the early human understanding that life on Earth is dependent on the rhythms of nature. This focus on the natural world and its cycles aligns with modern environmentalist ideals that emphasize the importance of sustainable farming practices, respect for biodiversity, and the need to protect the Earth's ecosystems. One of the most pressing environmental challenges of our time is the destruction of ecosystems and the depletion of natural resources due to human activity. The modern environmental movement, which seeks to address issues such as climate change, deforestation, pollution, and habitat loss, has drawn on many different philosophical and spiritual traditions for inspiration. Druidry, with its deep-rooted ecological wisdom, offers a model for living in a way that is harmonious with nature, advocating for a spiritual and practical relationship with the earth that emphasizes balance, renewal, and care for the planet. The modern Druidic movement, particularly within the Neo-Druidic community, has become an active participant in environmental advocacy. Many contemporary Druids view themselves not only as spiritual seekers, but as guardians of the earth, dedicated to protecting its sacredness and ensuring its well-being for future generations. Neo-Druidic rituals often include prayers for the healing of the earth, the protection of endangered species, and the restoration of damaged ecosystems. The Druidic belief in the interconnectedness of all life has led many modern Druids to become involved in environmental activism, particularly in efforts to combat climate change and preserve natural habitats. Many of these practitioners participate in tree planting projects, engage in conservation efforts, and advocate for policies that promote sustainability and environmental justice. In addition to their direct involvement in environmental activism, modern Druids also contribute to the growing body of eco-spiritual thought. Eco-spirituality is a movement that seeks to integrate spiritual practices with environmental consciousness, emphasizing the sacredness of the natural world and the need for humanity to live in a way that honors and sustains the earth. Eco-spiritual practitioners often draw from the wisdom of ancient traditions like Druidism, combining it with contemporary environmental concerns to create a holistic framework for living sustainably. In this context, Druidry serves as a powerful example of how spiritual teachings can be applied to modern environmental challenges. By looking to the past, the modern Druidic movement finds not only a source of wisdom, but a practical model for addressing the ecological crises of today. The Druidic reverence for nature is also reflected in the concept of sacred ecology, which emphasizes the importance of viewing the earth and its ecosystems as sacred and deserving of protection. Sacred ecology recognizes that the earth is a living organism with its own consciousness and spiritual essence. This perspective encourages humans to adopt a stewardship role, caring for the land as one would care for a sacred temple. In many ways, the Druids were early practitioners of sacred ecology, seeing the land not as a commodity to be exploited, but as a sacred trust to be protected and respected. Modern environmental movements that emphasize the importance of sustainable land management, ecological conservation, and the protection of biodiversity often draw from these ancient teachings. In the context of environmental ethics, the Druidic belief in the sanctity of nature also aligns with modern movements that advocate for a deep sense of respect and reverence for the planet. This ethical framework, known as ecocentrism, places the environment at the center of moral concern and argues that all living beings have inherent value, regardless of their utility to humans. This aligns closely with the Druidic view that all aspects of nature, whether plants, animals, or natural formations, have spiritual significance. By promoting the idea that the earth itself is sacred, Druidry encourages a profound shift in how we relate to the environment, moving away from the exploitive attitudes that have dominated modern industrial society. The Druidic practices of eco-spirituality and environmental advocacy are particularly relevant in the age of climate change. The environmental challenges of the 21st century require a holistic approach that combines science, activism, and spiritual wisdom. Modern Druids are increasingly aware of the importance of incorporating spiritual teachings into the fight for environmental justice. They recognize that environmental issues are not just political or economic. They are spiritual at their core. The destruction of the earth and its ecosystems is seen as a spiritual crisis, one that can only be addressed by changing our collective attitudes toward nature and fostering a deeper sense of respect and interconnectedness. In conclusion, the ancient Druidic tradition continues to offer valuable insights into the relationship between humans and the natural world. The Druids' deep reverence for nature, their Their understanding of the interconnectedness of all life and their belief in the sacredness of the earth continue to inspire modern environmental movements. Whether through the celebration of seasonal festivals, the practice of eco-spirituality, or the advocacy for environmental protection, the Druidic legacy plays a vital role in shaping contemporary environmentalism. In a world facing unprecedented ecological challenges, the teachings of the Druids remind us of the importance of living in harmony with the earth, protecting its sacredness, and fostering a deep sense of responsibility for the well-being of the planet and future generations. The ancient Druids, though long gone from the historical stage, have left a deep imprint on modern spiritual practices, particularly in the realm of rituals and ceremonies. These practices, while rooted in the beliefs and traditions of the Druids themselves, have evolved over time, influenced by various spiritual movements, cultural shifts, and a growing interest in nature-based spirituality. In the present day, Druidic-inspired rituals are widely practiced by both those who identify as modern Druids and those who seek a deeper connection to the earth through spiritual ceremonies. This section will explore the ways in which Druidic practices are integrated into contemporary rituals and ceremonies, from neo-Druidic celebrations of the seasons to modern-day spiritual gatherings that honor the cycles of nature and the forces of the universe. At the heart of Druidic rituals is the celebration of the natural world. The Druids were deeply connected to the rhythms of the earth, and their ceremonies were often designed to align with the cycles of nature. Today, many contemporary rituals continue this practice, marking the turning point of the year and honoring the seasonal changes. The Druidic year, structured around the four main festivals of Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lughnasadh, continues to be a focal point for many modern Druids. These festivals, each associated with a specific phase of the agricultural and solar cycles, provide a framework for spiritual ceremonies that honor the earth's cycles of birth, growth, death, and renewal. Samhain, which marks the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter, is perhaps the most widely observed of the Druidic festivals. It has had a profound influence on modern Halloween traditions, yet its spiritual significance goes much deeper. For contemporary Druids, Samhain is a time to honor the ancestors, to reflect on the past, and to acknowledge the interconnectedness of life and death. Rituals during Samhain often involve creating sacred spaces to invite the spirits of departed loved ones, lighting candles, and offering prayers for guidance and protection. Samhain is also a time to focus on the spiritual realms, as it was believed to be the time when the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest. In modern rituals, these themes are celebrated through meditation, visualization, and ritual acts of remembrance and honoring. Imbolc, celebrated in early February, is a festival of renewal and purification. Traditionally associated with the goddess Bridget, Imbolc marks the midpoint between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, signaling the return of light and the awakening of the earth after the long winter months. Contemporary rituals for Imbolc focus on purification, both physically and spiritually. Many practitioners use this time to cleanse their homes, their minds, and their hearts, preparing for new beginnings. It is also a time to honor the feminine aspect of spirituality, as Bridget is associated with fertility, creativity, and healing. Rituals may involve lighting candles to symbolize the return of the sun, performing acts of purification, and setting intentions for personal growth in the year ahead. Beltane, celebrated on May 1st, is a festival of fertility, passion, and growth. It marks the transition from spring to summer, and is often seen as a time of celebration and joy. In Druidic rituals, Beltane was traditionally a time for the lighting of bonfires, a practice that is still maintained in modern ceremonies. The fires symbolize the power of the sun and the life-giving energy that it brings to the earth. In contemporary Beltane rituals, participants often dance around a maypole, an act that symbolizes the union of the divine masculine and feminine, the coming together of the sun and the earth to bring forth new life. Rituals may also include offerings of flowers, herbs, and food to honor the earth's fertility and abundance. Beltane is also a time to celebrate love and sensuality, with many modern Druids using the occasion to deepen their connection to the physical world and to the divine through acts of sacred sexuality or the honoring of relationships. Lughnasadh, the first of the harvest festivals, is celebrated on August 1st and marks the beginning of the grain harvest. It is a time for giving thanks for the bounty of the earth and for acknowledging the fruits of one's labor. Contemporary rituals for Lughnasadh often focus on gratitude, abundance, and community. Feasting is a central element of the celebration, as practitioners come together to share food, celebrate their harvest, and give thanks for the earth's generosity. In modern rituals, there is often an emphasis on personal achievement, as well as spiritual growth. It is a time to reflect on what has been harvested in one's life, whether in terms of personal accomplishments, relationships, or spiritual insights. Lugnisad rituals may include offerings of bread, grain, or fruit to honor the harvest, as well as prayers for the continued prosperity of the land and the community. In addition to the four main festivals, modern Druids often incorporate other elements of ancient Druidic practice into their rituals and ceremonies. One of these elements is a reverence for sacred sites, particularly trees. The Druids considered certain trees, especially the oak, ash, and yew, to be sacred. Many modern Druids continue this tradition, performing rituals in groves, forests, or near significant trees. The act of communing with trees is seen as a way to connect with the spiritual energy of the earth, as well as to honor the wisdom and strength that trees represent. Some modern Druids also practice a form of divination known as Ogham, which involves interpreting the meanings of the ancient Druidic alphabet, carved into sticks or stones. Ogham divination is used to gain insight into personal challenges, spiritual questions, or to receive messages from the natural world. Another key component of modern Druidic rituals is the invocation of the elements: earth, air, fire, and water. In ancient Druidic ceremonies, these elements were seen as powerful forces of nature, each with its own unique qualities and significance. In contemporary rituals, the elements are often invoked at the beginning of ceremonies to create balance and harmony, and to honor the forces of nature. For example, participants might call upon the element of earth for stability, air for mental clarity, fire for transformation, and water for emotional healing. These elemental invocations are a way to connect with the primal forces of nature, reinforcing the Druidic belief in the interconnectedness of all life and the spiritual energy that flows through the earth. The use of sacred space is another important feature of modern Druidic rituals. In keeping with the ancient practice of performing rituals in natural settings, contemporary Druids often seek out sacred or powerful locations in the natural world to conduct their ceremonies. This might include forests, hills, stone circles, or other places that hold personal or spiritual significance. The creation of a sacred circle is a common element of these rituals, as it represents a space where the mundane world is left behind, and the practitioner enters into direct communion with the divine, the spirits of the land, and the energies of the universe. Within the circle, ritual objects such as candles, crystals, incense, and other symbols of the natural world are often used to enhance the spiritual atmosphere. The modern Druidic movement has also contributed to the development of a more inclusive, diverse approach to spirituality, incorporating elements of ecofeminism, indigenous spirituality, and holistic healing practices. Contemporary Druidic rituals often emphasize the importance of personal empowerment, healing, and community building. Many rituals are designed to create a sense of unity and connectedness, both with the natural world and with one another. The use of music, poetry, and sacred chants is common in modern Druidic ceremonies, as these elements serve to enhance the spiritual atmosphere and create a deeper sense of connection to the divine and to the earth. In conclusion, Druidic practices continue to thrive in modern rituals and ceremonies, providing a spiritual framework for contemporary seekers who wish to honor the cycles of nature and the sacredness of the earth. From seasonal festivals to sacred invocations of the elements, modern Druidic rituals celebrate the interconnectedness of all life and the wisdom of the natural world. These ceremonies, while grounded in ancient traditions, have evolved over time, blending old and new practices to create a living, dynamic spirituality that resonates with people today. Through these rituals, modern Druids continue to honor the legacy of their ancient ancestors, keeping alive the sacred practices that have connected humanity to the earth for millennia. The symbols of the ancient Druids are some of the most enduring and powerful elements of their spiritual tradition, many of which continue to hold deep meaning for contemporary practitioners. These symbols were not only representations of mystical ideas or deities, but also held practical and spiritual significance in the everyday lives of the ancient Celts. As the Druids were known for their deep connection to nature, their symbols often reflected the forces of the natural world, as well as the cycles of life, death, and rebirth that were central to their belief system. In the modern era, These symbols have been revived and integrated into various spiritual practices, especially within the Neo-Druidic and broader pagan communities. This section will explore the key symbols associated with Druidry and their significance, both in ancient times and in contemporary spiritual practices. The Tree of Life is perhaps one of the most significant symbols in Druidry, representing the interconnectedness of all things. In the Druidic worldview, trees were sacred beings, possessing wisdom, strength, and spiritual power. The ancient Druids revered certain trees like the oak, ash, and yew, seeing them as bridges between the physical and spiritual worlds. The Tree of Life symbol represents a union of these realms, with its roots reaching into the earth and its branches extending into the heavens. It is a powerful emblem of growth, transformation, and spiritual connection, representing both personal and collective evolution. In modern Druidic practices, the Tree of Life is often used in rituals and meditations to connect practitioners to the cycles of nature, to their ancestral roots, and to the divine energies that flow through the natural world. Another prominent symbol in Druidry is the triquetra, also known as the triple spiral or the triple knot. This symbol, consisting of 3 interwoven spirals or loops, represents the idea of unity and multiplicity, as well as the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The number 3 holds great significance in Druidic thought, representing the triad as a sacred structure. This is seen in many aspects of their belief system, from the 3 realms of earth, sea, and sky, to the threefold nature of the divine. The triple spiral specifically is a symbol of spiritual transformation, often linked to the movement of the seasons and the eternal rhythm of life. In modern Druidry, the triquetra is a reminder of the importance of balance and harmony, both within oneself and in relation to the natural world. The Celtic cross is another widely recognized Druidic symbol, though it has evolved over time and has been used by various spiritual traditions, including Christianity. However, its roots in Druidic symbolism are evident in its original form, which combined the cross with a circle. The circle represents the eternal, unbroken cycle of life and the cyclical nature of time, while the cross symbolizes the intersection of the physical and spiritual realms. Together, these elements form a powerful representation of the union of opposites, the material and the divine, the temporal and the eternal. In modern spiritual practices, the Celtic cross is often used to symbolize unity, protection, and the connection between the heavens and the earth. It serves as a reminder that all things are interconnected, and that life is an ongoing cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The awn is another deeply important symbol in Druidry, often depicted as 3 rays of light radiating from a central point. In ancient Druidic tradition, the awn represented divine inspiration, wisdom, and creativity. The 3 rays are typically interpreted as symbolizing the balance of opposites, the masculine and the feminine, the spiritual and the material, the earthly and the celestial. The awn is associated with the creative force that flows through all life, inspiring artists, poets, and spiritual seekers. In modern Druidic practices, the awn is invoked in rituals and ceremonies to invite divine wisdom and inspiration. It is a symbol of spiritual illumination and is often used to connect practitioners to the flow of cosmic energy that runs through all living things. The oak tree is perhaps the most iconic and revered symbol of Druidry. In ancient Celtic tradition, the oak was seen as a sacred tree of wisdom and strength. The Druids believed that oak groves were sacred spaces where they could commune with the divine and perform their rituals. The oak tree symbolized endurance, resilience, and the strength to withstand hardship, much like the ancient Druids themselves. The oak also represented the connection between the material and spiritual worlds, with its roots grounding in the earth and its branches reaching toward the heavens. In modern Druidry, the oak continues to be a symbol of strength, wisdom, and spiritual insight. It is often invoked in rituals for protection, guidance, and resilience, and is celebrated during the festival of Beltane, where its life-giving energy is honored. The yew tree also holds significant meaning in Druidic symbolism. The yew is often associated with death and rebirth, due to its longevity and its ability to grow in places of ancient burial grounds. In Celtic belief, the yew tree was seen as a bridge between the realms of the living and the dead, and it was considered a guardian of the underworld. The yew's evergreen nature, which allows it to survive through the harshest of winters, also symbolized eternal life and the ability to transcend the physical realm. In modern Druidic practices, the yew tree is revered for its deep connection to the cycles of life and death, and is often used in rituals of healing, renewal, and ancestor veneration. The horn god, often depicted as a figure with antlers, is another powerful symbol in Druidry. This symbol represents the masculine aspect of the divine, embodying strength, vitality, and fertility. The horn god is often associated with the hunt, the wilds of nature, and the cycle of life and death. He is a symbol of the life force that flows through the world and the natural rhythms of growth, death, and rebirth. In modern Druidic practices, the horn god is honored during festivals like Beltane and Samhain, when themes of fertility, transformation, and ancestral connection are central. The horn god also represents the primal energy of nature, a force that is both nurturing and wild, and is invoked in rituals that seek to connect with the earth's untamed power. In addition to these symbols, many modern Druids also use a variety of other tools and images to enhance their spiritual practices. These include the use of stones, crystals, and herbs, each of which carries its own unique symbolism and energetic properties. For example, quartz crystals are often used to amplify spiritual energy, while herbs like mugwort and sage are burned for purification and protection. Ritual tools such as athames, ritual knives, staffs, and cauldrons are also commonly employed in ceremonies to represent different aspects of the divine and the natural world. The power of Druidic symbols in modern spiritual practices is rooted in their ability to evoke a deep sense of connection to the natural world and to the divine forces that permeate all of creation. These symbols serve as bridges between the human and the divine, the material and the spiritual, offering a means of understanding and accessing the hidden forces that shape our lives. Through the use of symbols such as the Tree of Life, the Triquetra, and the Oak, modern Druids continue to draw upon the ancient wisdom of their ancestors, using these powerful images to guide their spiritual journeys and to deepen their connection to the earth. In conclusion, Druidic symbols hold a profound and enduring significance in both ancient and modern spiritual practices. These symbols, deeply rooted in the natural world, serve as powerful tools for connecting to the divine, for understanding the cycles of nature, and for invoking spiritual energies. In modern Druidic rituals, these symbols are used to enhance the practice of reverence to the earth, to celebrate the cycles of life, and to foster a deeper sense of unity with the universe. As modern Druidry continues to evolve and adapt, these symbols remain central to tradition, providing a bridge between the ancient and the contemporary, and offering a timeless source of wisdom and guidance. Divination has been an integral part of Druidic practice for centuries, serving as a bridge between the human world and the unseen realms. For the ancient Druids, divination was not just a method for predicting the future, but a means of communicating with the divine, the ancestors, and the natural forces that govern the world. It was a sacred art, practice of reverence, and was considered an essential part of their spiritual work. In the modern era, divination continues to play a significant role in contemporary Druidry and various forms of neo-paganism, offering practitioners a way to seek guidance, clarity, and deeper connection to the spiritual realm. This section explores the Druidic approach to divination, its methods, and how its practices remain relevant in today's spiritual landscape. One of the most iconic forms of Druidic divination was the use of Ogham, an ancient Celtic alphabet made up of a series of marks or lines that represented trees and other symbols of a natural world. The Ogham script was primarily used for communication, but also served as a tool for divination, where each symbol or letter was associated with specific meanings and interpretations. In the Druidic tradition, the Ogham was not simply an alphabet, but a sacred system, rich in mystical significance. The trees that formed the basis of the Ogham alphabet were considered to hold deep spiritual power, with each tree embodying specific qualities, energies, and wisdom. The practice of Ogham divination involves selecting a series of Ogham sticks or carving symbols onto pieces of wood. The diviner would then interpret the patterns that emerge, using the meanings of the symbols to gain insight into the question or situation at hand. Each tree in the Ogham alphabet was linked to an elemental force, a deity, or a particular aspect of life. For example, the oak, symbolized by the letter Dur, represented strength, endurance, and protection. The ash, associated with the letter Nyan, was linked to healing, transformation, and spiritual growth. The birch tree, symbolized by Beth, was often used for purification and new beginnings. The symbolic language of Ogham divination allowed the Druids to connect with the spiritual energies of the natural world and seek guidance from forces beyond the physical realm. While Ogham divination was a central practice in ancient Druidry, other forms of divination were also employed. The Druids were known to use other natural methods for gaining insight, such as interpreting the flight patterns of birds, the movements of the stars, or the patterns in the wind. The sacred relationship between the Druids and the natural world meant that all elements of the environment were seen as interconnected and imbued with spiritual significance. For instance, the flight of birds was a common form of divination, as birds were thought to be messengers of the gods. The ancient Druids would observe the direction and pattern of bird flights to interpret omens, with specific birds, such as the raven or the owl, holding particular importance in their divination systems. The practice of observing nature for signs and omens, known as augury, was another key method of Druidic divination. Augury involved paying attention to natural events, such as the movement of animals, the weather, or the growth patterns of plants. These natural occurrences were believed to carry messages from the divine, offering insight into the future or guidance in times of uncertainty. The Druids also practiced a form of divination known as casting lots, where sacred objects, such as stones, runes, or symbols, were cast on the ground and their arrangement interpreted to reveal hidden truths. The sacredness of these objects and the rituals surrounding them added to the divinatory process, emphasizing connection between the physical and spiritual realms. In modern Druidic practice, divination continues to be an important tool for personal insight and spiritual guidance. Many modern Druids use the Ogham system in much the same way as the ancient practitioners, though often with adaptations for contemporary contexts. Ogham cards or runes are used in modern divination, allowing practitioners to connect with the wisdom of the trees and their symbolic meanings. Some modern Druidic practitioners even craft their own Ogham sticks, drawing inspiration from the natural world and the energy of the trees. The practice of Ogham divination has been embraced by many neo-pagan traditions and is often included in rituals and ceremonies to help individuals gain clarity and direction in their lives. In addition to Ogham, tarot cards and other forms of divination have become popular in contemporary Druidry, reflecting a broader trend in modern spirituality. While tarot cards are not inherently Druidic, they share many of the same symbolic qualities that are central to Druidic practice, such as archetypes, cycles, and the balance between the conscious and unconscious mind. Tarot cards, like the Ogham, allow practitioners to tap into their intuition, the energy of the natural world, and the wisdom of the divine. Many modern Druidic practitioners incorporate tarot readings into their spiritual practices, using the cards as a means to access deeper levels of understanding, whether for personal reflection, decision-making, or spiritual growth. The rise of divinatory practices in the modern world is also closely linked to a growing interest in eco-spirituality and a reclaiming of ancient traditions. As more people seek to reconnect with nature and explore the mysteries of the universe, divination provides a means of tapping into a timeless source of wisdom. The ancient Druidic methods of divination, grounded in an intimate relationship with the natural world, offer a valuable framework for modern seekers who wish to understand themselves and the world around them in a more holistic, interconnected way. Divination serves as a tool for aligning with the natural rhythms of the earth, understanding the subtle energies at play in our lives, and cultivating a deeper connection to the divine. One of the reasons divination remains so relevant today is its ability to offer a sense of clarity and direction, especially in times of uncertainty or transition. In the fast-paced modern world, where individuals often feel disconnected from nature and the spiritual world, divination provides a way to reconnect with the deeper forces that shape our lives. Whether through the ancient methods of Ogham, the patterns of bird flight, or the symbolism of tarot cards, divination offers a way of understanding the patterns and energies at work in the world and gaining insight into the future or one's own inner life. Furthermore, divination in the Druidic tradition is not solely about foretelling the future. It is also about gaining wisdom and insight in the present moment. The divinatory process is seen as a dialogue between practitioner and the spiritual forces, a way of engaging with the unseen energies that influence our lives. In this sense, divination is a tool for self-discovery, helping individuals tap into their intuition, unlock hidden truths, and align with their higher purpose. It fosters a sense of empowerment, as practitioners are encouraged to trust their own instincts and the messages they receive from the spiritual realm. In conclusion, the Druidic approach to divination is a rich and profound tradition that continues to resonate with modern spiritual seekers. Rooted in an intimate connection to the natural world and the divine, Druidic divination offers valuable insights into the cycles of life, the mysteries of the universe, and the personal journeys of those who seek guidance. Whether through Ogham, bird augury, or tarot, divination remains a powerful tool for spiritual exploration, self-reflection, and alignment with the natural forces that govern our lives. In today's world, where many feel disconnected from nature and the spiritual realm, Druidic divination offers a way to reconnect with the divine wisdom that lies within us and around us, providing guidance, clarity, and insight in our ongoing spiritual journey. In ancient Celtic society, the role of the Druid was multifaceted and deeply significant. The Druids were not merely spiritual leaders. They served as priests, scholars, lawgivers, judges, and advisors, wielding considerable influence over both the spiritual and temporal affairs of their communities. They were the custodians of ancient knowledge, responsible for preserving the traditions, myths, and history of the Celts, as well as for interpreting the natural world and the will of the gods. Their role in society was highly respected, and the power they held was both spiritual and political in nature. This section explores the diverse roles the Druids played in ancient Celtic society, shedding light on their responsibilities and the lasting impact they had on the cultural and spiritual life of the Celts. One of the most important roles of the Druids was that of the spiritual leader. They were seen as the mediators between the gods and the people, and their rituals and ceremonies were believed to maintain the balance between the spiritual and physical realms. The Druids were often called upon to perform sacrifices, offer prayers, and conduct ceremonies that were central to the Celtic religious life. These ceremonies were often held in sacred groves, on hilltops, or by rivers, places that were considered to be close to the gods. Druids had the responsibility of interpreting omens and signs, ensuring that the community remained in favor with the gods and the natural forces that governed their world. Through their rituals, they sought to foster harmony with the natural world, align the community with the changing seasons, and ensure agricultural success. In addition to their religious duties, the Druids were also the intellectual elite of Celtic society. They were the keepers of knowledge, responsible for the oral transmission of sacred texts, laws, and traditions. The education of a Druid was long and rigorous, requiring many years of study. This was a society that valued oral tradition over written language, and the Druids were tasked with memorizing vast amounts of information, from genealogies and historical accounts to poetry, philosophy, and mythological tales. The Druids' deep knowledge of the natural world, their understanding of astronomy, and their wisdom in matters of ethics and law made them highly respected members of Celtic society. They were often consulted on matters of governance, offering counsel to kings, chiefs, and other leaders. Their role as advisors was crucial, as their knowledge was believed to come directly from the gods, making their advice not only highly valued but also considered sacred. The judicial role of the Druid was another key aspect of their function in society. Druids were responsible for interpreting the laws and ensuring that justice was carried out. Celtic society was organized around a complex system of customary law, which the Druids were entrusted to uphold. The Druids were the judges in legal disputes, mediating between parties and ensuring that the law was applied fairly. They were known to have a deep understanding of the laws of nature, and they often used this knowledge to guide their decisions. The Druids were also believed to possess the ability to see the truth in matters of justice, with some accounts suggesting that they could divine the outcome of a legal dispute through ritual or by reading the signs in nature. Another aspect of the Druidic role was their function as healers and medical practitioners. While the Celts had a rich tradition of herbalism and folk medicine, the Druids were considered the foremost experts in these fields. They were knowledgeable in the properties of plants, herbs, and natural remedies, and their healing practices were highly sought after. Druids were believed to have a special connection with the earth and its healing properties, and they used this connection to treat physical ailments and restore balance to the body and mind. In addition to their physical healing abilities, the Druids were also seen as spiritual healers, able to offer guidance and comfort to those suffering from emotional or psychological distress. The Druids' ability to heal both body and spirit was one of the reasons they were so highly regarded in their communities. The Druidic role as a teacher was also central to their influence in Celtic society. Druids were the educators of their time, passing on knowledge to the next generation of leaders, healers, and spiritual guides. The education system for young Druids was both demanding and highly specialized. It was a tradition that emphasized learning through oral transmission, with students spending many years memorizing the sacred texts, laws, and history of their people. They also learned the skills necessary for performing rituals, interpreting the natural world, and providing counsel to the community. The training of a Druid was considered sacred, and those who completed their studies were given a position of great respect within their society. In their role as teachers, the Druids also played a part in preserving the cultural and spiritual heritage of the Celts. As the keepers of ancient myths, legends, and songs, they were the link between the past and the future, ensuring that the traditions of their ancestors were passed down through generations. Many of the great myths and stories of the Celtic tradition, such as the tales of the gods, heroes, and legendary kings, were preserved and shared by the Druids. They were also the storytellers, using their knowledge of history and mythology to impart moral lessons and guide the community in times of need. The Druids were also responsible for maintaining the sacred sites that were central to Celtic religious practice. These included groves of trees, stone circles, and other natural landmarks that were believed to be imbued with divine energy. The Druids not only performed rituals at these sacred sites, but also ensured that they were properly maintained and revered. The sacred groves, in particular, were seen as places of great spiritual power, and the Druids were the guardians of these spaces, ensuring that they were kept pure and free from desecration. These groves were often the sites of important ceremonies, including sacrifices and divinations, and were considered the most sacred places within the Druidic tradition. Despite their significant influence in ancient Celtic society, the Druids faced challenges with the arrival of Roman conquest in the 1st century BCE. The Romans, who viewed Druidism as a threat to their empire, sought to suppress the Druids and their practices. Many Druids were killed and sacred sites were destroyed. However, the legacy of the Druids endured. As the Roman Empire expanded and later fell, elements of Druidic thought and practice were preserved in the folklore and religious traditions of the Celtic people. The influence of the Druids can be seen in the development of later religious and spiritual movements, particularly in the context of nature-based spirituality and neo-paganism. In modern times, the Druidic influence continues to be felt, especially within the context of the growing interest in nature spirituality, eco-consciousness, and the revival of ancient traditions. Today, many modern Druids seek to reclaim the spiritual, intellectual, and healing roles that the ancient Druids once held, although their practices have adapted to needs and concerns of contemporary society. Modern Druidry, as it is practiced in various neo-pagan and spiritual communities, often involves a deep reverence for nature, the celebration of the cycles of the seasons, and the pursuit of personal and spiritual growth. In conclusion, the Druids of ancient Celtic society played a central and multifaceted role, influencing the spiritual, legal, intellectual, and cultural life of their communities. As spiritual leaders, educators, healers, and advisors, they were deeply respected and their knowledge was considered sacred. Although their practices were suppressed by the Romans, the legacy of the Druids has continued to inspire spiritual seekers and cultural movements throughout history. The influence of the Druids can still be seen today, as modern Druidry seeks to revive and reinterpret the ancient teachings, rituals, and practices that were once central to Celtic life. The decline of the Druids and the eventual suppression of their practices is one of the most significant chapters in the history of the ancient Celtic world. The Druids, once at the heart of Celtic society as spiritual leaders, intellectuals, and political advisors, saw their influence waning as the Roman Empire expanded and sought to subdue the tribes of Britain, Gaul, and beyond. The rise of Roman power in the 1st century BCE and the subsequent invasions and conquest of Celtic territories led to the gradual erosion of Druidic practices. This section examines the factors that contributed to the decline of the Druids, the Roman efforts to suppress them, and the lasting impact of their suppression on Celtic culture and spirituality. The Druids were deeply intertwined with Celtic identity, serving as the religious, intellectual, and legal authorities in their communities. They played a central role in upholding Celtic traditions, rituals, and laws, and their influence was far-reaching. The Druids were responsible for teaching the youth of the tribes, preserving the oral history of the Celts, and maintaining the sacred sites where important religious ceremonies were held. Their power was not only spiritual but also political, as they often advised kings and chieftains, guiding them in matters of governance and warfare. The Druids were considered the custodians of ancient knowledge, and their influence extended throughout the Celtic world, from Ireland and Britain to Gaul and beyond. However, with the expansion of the Roman Empire into Celtic territories, the Druids began to face increasing pressure. The Romans, under the leadership of Julius Caesar, began to conquer large parts of Gaul, modern-day France. In the 1st century BCE, Caesar, in particular, viewed the Druids as a threat to Roman control. The Druids' influence over the Celtic tribes, their resistance to Romanization, and their role in fostering resistance to Roman rule made them a natural target for suppression. The Roman Empire sought not only to conquer lands, but also to impose its own cultural and religious system upon the peoples it subjugated. The Druids, with their strong connection to the ancient Celtic ways, represent a challenge to the imperial agenda, which sought to establish Roman religion, governance, and cultural practices across its territories. In 53 BCE, Julius Caesar launched a campaign against the Gauls, and in his writings, particularly in Commentarii de Bello Gallico, commentaries on the Gallic War, he documented his campaigns and the role of the Druids. Caesar described the Druids as the leaders of the resistance against Roman rule, noting their power in both religious and political matters. He also depicted the Druids as central to the unity of the Celtic tribes, as they were the ones who held the knowledge and wisdom that bound the communities together. Caesar's writings emphasized the Druids' role in inspiring rebellion and resistance to Roman control, which further convinced the Roman authorities that the Druids had to be eliminated to ensure the subjugation of the Celtic peoples. As a result, the Romans made significant efforts to suppress Druidic practices. One of the most direct actions taken by the Romans was the banning of Druidism. In 56 BCE, following Caesar's conquest of Gaul, the Roman Senate passed a decree that banned Druidic practices across the empire. This was part of a broader Roman effort to suppress indigenous religious practices in the territories it conquered. Druidic ceremonies, sacrifices, and teachings were prohibited, and the sacred groves and temples associated with Druidism were destroyed. The Roman authorities sought to replace Celtic religious practices with Roman gods and rituals, viewing the Druids as a key obstacle to their success in fully Romanizing the Celtic peoples. The suppression of the Druids intensified following the Roman invasion of Britain in 43 CE. The Celts in Britain had long resisted Roman rule, and the Romans recognized the Druids as key figures in fostering that resistance. In response, the Romans launched a campaign to destroy the Druidic institutions in Britain, and they attacked the sacred groves and sanctuaries that were central to Druidic religious life. One of the most significant events in this campaign occurred in 60 or 61 CE, when the Roman army, led by the governor Suetonius Paulinus, destroyed the Druidic stronghold of Anglesey, an island off the coast of Wales that had been a major center of Druidic learning and practice. The island of Anglesey had been home to many Druidic scholars and priests, and its destruction marked the symbolic and physical end of Druidism's central authority in Britain. The Roman destruction of Druidic sites and the suppression of their practices led to a sharp decline in the prominence of the Druids. Many Druids were killed, and others were forced into hiding or exile. The oral traditions of Druidism were threatened by the loss of sacred texts and the disruption of the schools where the Druids had once passed on their knowledge. In the absence of these institutions, the Druidic teachings began to fade from public life. With the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire, the influence of the Druids continued to diminish. Christianity, which had been spreading across the empire since the 1st century CE, became the dominant religion, and its leaders, like the Romans, viewed the Druids as a threat to the new faith. The Druidic gods and rituals were gradually replaced by Christian beliefs and practices, and many of the sacred sites associated with Druidism were repurposed for Christian worship. Despite the efforts of the Romans and later Christian authorities to suppress Druidic practices, some elements of Druidic thought and tradition managed to survive. As the Celtic peoples were forced to adapt to Roman and Christian rule, they often incorporated aspects of Druidic beliefs into their new religious and cultural practices. For example, many Christian saints and festivals in Celtic regions were linked to the cycles of nature and the agricultural calendar, which had been central to Druidic spirituality. In addition, some of the mythological figures and stories from the Druidic tradition were absorbed into the Christian folklore of the British Isles. This blending of traditions helped to preserve certain aspects of Druidic culture, even as the Druids themselves disappeared from public life. The decline of the Druids did not mean the complete eradication of their influence. In the centuries that followed, The idea of the Druids and their wisdom continued to resonate in both the folklore of the Celtic peoples and in the imagination of later generations. The image of the Druid as a wise and mystical figure persisted, particularly in the Romantic period of the 18th and 19th centuries, when scholars and spiritual seekers began to revive interest in ancient Celtic traditions. Modern Druidry, as practiced today in various neo-pagan and spiritual communities, is in many ways a revival of the spiritual and cultural practices of the ancient Druids, albeit adapted to contemporary beliefs and practices. The Roman suppression of the Druids, while ultimately successful in diminishing their power and influence, did not succeed in fully eradicating the legacy of the Druids. Instead, the decline of the Druids marked the beginning of a long process of cultural assimilation and transformation, in which the ancient traditions of the Celts were preserved, reinterpreted, and eventually revived in new forms. The story of the decline of the Druids is a reminder of the resilience of cultural and spiritual traditions, and the enduring power of human memory and imagination in keeping the spirit of ancient practices alive. In conclusion, the decline of the Druids was a complex process influenced by the expansion of the Roman Empire, the suppression of indigenous religious practices, and the rise of Christianity. While the Romans succeeded in diminishing the power of the Druids and their practices, the legacy of Druidism lived on, both in the folklore of the Celtic peoples and in the resurgence of interest in their teachings in later centuries. The suppression of the Druids by the Romans serves as a poignant reminder of the ways in which cultures and traditions are shaped by forces of conquest and transformation, and how ancient wisdom can continue to inspire and guide future generations, even in the face of suppression and loss.